As I kind of offered right before class started, I'm assuming things are pretty weird for you guys. Things are definitely weird over here in terms of the semester. We're doing the best that we can, and I'm going to approach you guys with that in mind as well. That said, I have kind of two important questions before we do anything else in this class, because it's really going to determine how class goes. Number one, did anybody not watch the video I posted last week of that first class? I appreciate your honesty. Just one? Two? Okay. You want to get in the habit of doing that. And again, that's why I asked. This is our first real class, which sucks because this is your first class. Most of the time you have the syllabus class with you kind of dip your toe in, but this is just throw your ass in the deep end sort of thing. If you'd watch the video, I feel like you'd be a little more prepared, is the only reason I ask. You will be fine today, but there may be certain points where you're like, what? That's okay. It's not going to be like that all semester, all right? Okay. Because at the end of my last class, we talked about the syllabus, but we also, for about 20 minutes or so, talked about poems and how to talk about them. That may be the part. You guys will get there, but there may be a little bit where you... Okay. Other question I had. Did anybody not read the poem for today? There's only one. Just you. 2, 3. You guys. Okay. Again, you may feel a little out of your depth, but hopefully by the end of class you feel like you're on the same page, right? Okay. All that out of the way. The first thing we're going to do before we ever get into talking about poems, any of that stuff, you're going to watch me struggle with this screen. Dang. Oh, all right. It's kind of off. It doesn't really, I can't read that. All right. What I like to do at the beginning of every unit, which is what we're at today, is talk about the paper. No matter what we do in this unit, we're going to talk about several poems. We're going to practice analysis for reasons that will become pretty obvious here in a minute. But all of that, because you guys are students, and I know you're worried about grades and all that stuff, all of that in some way is couched in, okay, but what are we writing about? Well, it's this. Paper 1, it's an analysis essay. I'm going to shit on high school a couple times throughout the semester. I don't even think about it most of the time, but I've thought about this one, and it's purposeful. There's a very good chance you performed some kind of analysis. Maybe you wrote an analysis paper in high school recently. With very few exceptions, that was not real analysis in the way we talk about it. I'm not saying it didn't prepare you in some way, but what I am saying is that's probably not going to get it done here, because high school, more often than not, is just like a string of book reports, unfortunately. All right, source text. Any assigned poem from The Art of the Lathe. Now, important note about that. In years previous, I would have you buy this book, okay? And I say any assigned poem because I used to have you read more poems from the book. But over the past couple years, I've trimmed down how many poems I have you read. I also ended up typing those up. So what that means is you do not have to buy this book. You can. I think it's awesome. But you don't have to. Any poem we read for Unit 1 is on Course 10. All right? It's in a section called Fairchild, because that's the author. They're up there for you. Right? Any of those poems. Percentage of grade, 20%, at least 3 pages. Format is MLA. We actually didn't have time in my last class to review MLA. We will sometime. It is 11:02, so I'm kind of working under the assumption that you have some idea of what MLA is. Now that said, a couple things. Number one, if you have questions about anything in the class, you can always ask me. That's fine. That's kind of my job. Number two, if you don't want to do that, I was that kind of student. I'm not asking anything. Google is a thing. You can Google MLA. She's pretty helpful, the Google. Number three, if you don't want to do that for some reason, I have an MLA template on Course 10. It's in the syllabus and other helpful documents section. It's right there. You click that guy. He's super helpful. Whatever you like. Final draft will be due at the end of week 5 by midnight, September 12th. So we have some time. And obviously we're going to work on it the whole time leading up to that. What the assignment is, as I mentioned, I kind of threw some shade at high school, and I meant it. I'm not taking that back. There's a lot here that explains what we mean when we say analysis, but I feel like I can sum it up a little bit easier. And I like to do it this way. If you leave class with little to nothing but this, these are important. I like to warn you guys away from traps that I've seen students previous to you fall into, okay? So the first trap people fall into in this paper, they have an issue moving beyond summary, okay? There is a profound difference between summary and argument. Summary, for instance, old men playing basketball. Even if you didn't read, and I'm not trying to call you guys out, I have a reason. What do you think old men playing basketball is about? Look at you. She just performed an excellent summary of that poem. Never even set eyes on it, right? That is what the poem is about. It's a great title like that. Now, the issue is, not a lot, but enough for me to worry about it. Some people will turn in papers where they talk to me about how old men playing basketball is about old men playing basketball. I know that. I read the poem, or in this case, I knew the title. That's not an argument, right? An argument is something you have to prove. You do not have to prove that the poem we're reading today is about old men playing basketball. That is silly. So whatever you do, you have to move past summary. You start there. We're going to start there today. But you have to move somewhere toward an idea that requires proof. Second thing, when we're talking about proof, there is also a difference between assumptions and evidence. We all have assumptions. We all bring them to the table, okay? No matter what we do. Now, we're talking about poems in this unit, but when you walk outside in the world, you form assumptions all the time. I love this example. If I see a guy on the quad who's like blasting music for all of us to enjoy as he's like walking around, I assume he's a prick. I assume that. I assume he's selfish and he wants me to hear his music. I don't want to hear your fucking music. I assume that. That probably has a lot to do with how I grew up. I had a rough childhood. But he could be a great guy. I don't know that, right? I'm working on my assumptions. I've used very little evidence, right? I took one thing and formed my whole opinion about that guy, right? You guys will do that with poems. You will. In my last class, I know you weren't there, but there is a video. But in my last class, we talked about this poem, Autumn Begins in Martins Ferry, Ohio. It's about football. So many times, students will struggle with, these people are upset because they didn't win the game, or they're working hard because they're going to get scholarships and get out of this town. And it's like, that's not in the poem anywhere. That came from you guys. You guys grew up a certain way. And I know there are differences, but this is America in 2020. You grew up with Disney movies. You grew up with, the guy didn't think he had a dad, and then he realized he was in the stands the whole time, and they hug at the end. Like, you guys grew up on a lot of that, like, aw, type of stuff. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but the important thing to understand is that's not always there. And whatever assumptions you're working with, sometimes they're true. Sometimes you can find them in stuff. 75% of the time, it's not. And you've got to be willing to recognize that as best you can and alter it, move past it, whatever it is. You have to work with evidence from the text. Whatever your ideas are, you have to be able to support them with the text. That's what argument is. That brings me to the third thing. There's only 3. Lastly, details. You guys hate talking to me about details. And I have a theory, which I know you're not interested in. But my theory on this is you guys, and I'm part of it too, but I'm a little older. You guys live in a world that doesn't want you thinking about details. We want you to buy things until you die. That's what you're trained to do in the world. Details get in the way of that. Details have you questioning things, thinking about, we don't want that. in this class, I want you talking to me not just about what you think is going on in a poem and why, but use specific details. I think this is happening. I'm arguing this based on this line or this couple words here, the way they're said, right? You've got to use details. If you don't, I promise your job gets harder. Questions about any of that? Okay. And again, we're going to practice this over the next couple weeks. So even if right now you're like, I barely know what's happening, hopefully it becomes clearer very soon. The last thing I'll say about the prompt, there's a special note here. One big part of 1102, on top of a couple other things, they want you thinking about research. They want you to be able to perform some kind of scholarly research. Now, we're going to do a little bit of that for Unit 1, but there's only one reason we're doing it. We're going to do a lot more research for Units 2 and 3. You have an assignment next week. It's very low stress, okay, where you have to find some kind of an article that ties into one of the poems we've read by that point, some idea in there or whatever, and it helps you better understand the poem, or it gets you thinking about it in a way that maybe you weren't before. We'll talk about it next week, okay? But I bring it up now for this reason. That's the only way we're using an outside source for this paper, is that one assignment, okay? When you actually sit down to write this paper, the only text you should use is one poem. That's it. Not multiple poems, not a secondary source, none of that. It's just you and one poem, okay? We clear on that? Some people get that wire crossed. Okay. All right. To perform any kind of analysis whatsoever, poems, stories, commercials, it doesn't matter. There are 3 steps you got to take. The first step is you have to read the thing. So we're going to do that now. Hopefully you're there or you're about to be. I'm just going to read it out loud. We won't do this every time, but for the shorter ones we will. This won't take 2 minutes. Old men playing basketball. The heavy bodies lunge, the broken language of fake and drive, glamorous jump shots slowed to a stutter. Their gestures, in love again with the pure geometry of curves, rise toward the ball, falter, and fall away. On the boards, their hands and fingertips tremble in tense little prayers of reach and balance. Then, the grind of bone and socket, the caught breath, the sigh, the grunt of the body laboring to give birth to itself. In their toiling and grand sweeps, I wonder, do they still make love to their wives, kissing the undersides of their wrists, dancing the old soft shoe of desire? And on the long walk home from the VFW, do they still sing to the drunken moon? Stands full, clock moving. The one in army fatigues and house shoes says to himself, pick and roll, and the phrase sounds musical as ever. Radio crooning songs of love after the game, the girl leaning back in the Chevy's front seat as her raven hair flames in the shuddering light of the outdoor movie, and now he drives, gliding toward the net. A glass wand of autumn light breaks over the backboard. Boys rise up in old men, wings begin to sprout at their backs. The ball turns in the darkening air. And that's it. That's step 1. We're a third of the way there. Step 2. All I want to do with the first bit, summary. You really can't perform analysis until you're clear on what's literally happening, okay? We're going to go stanza by stanza. Does anybody know what a stanza is? It's these paragraphs. So there's 7. There's 7 stanzas in this poem. If I ever throw that out again, that's all I'm talking about, okay? So first stanza, heavy bodies. What's going on here? What are we describing in this stanza? Do you think? The old men, what are they doing? They're playing basketball. How would you describe the game? What does it look like? Slow. Why do you say that? Slow to a stutter. Okay. How else would we describe this game? If you're describing somebody's jump shot as a slow stutter, we're talking about heavy bodies, we're talking about fake and drive as a broken language. What does this game look like? These old men playing basketball. What words would you use to describe this game, these old men? Are they crossing each other up? Are they doing some behind the back stuff? Maybe some like Harlem Globetrotters? Like what does this game look like? This will be probably one of the top 5 easiest questions I ask you all semester, just so we're clear. What does it look like? You were describing this for some reason, poem to a friend after the class. You're like, oh, that first stanza, it was all about these old men playing basketball. What does this game look like? Slow. What else? Why does it look slow, maybe? Ooh, girl. All right. Why are these old men so slow? Well, yes. That's a tautology, by the way. It's a logical fallacy. Maybe because they're struggling? They're having a hard time physically? Look at that, we got there together. Okay. Second stanza. What's going on here? More what, first of all? We have struggle in the first stanza. What's going on in the second stanza? More struggle. Specifically how? We talk about a jump shot, for instance, in the first stanza. What are we doing in the second stanza? Talk about the boards. Yeah. Does anybody know what's going on there?
Arthritis.
What's it about?
Arthritis.
I mean, possibly. I meant with basketball, but I mean, almost assuredly, yeah, they're having all kinds of like joint stuff. What are the boards? Anybody know what's going on there? Yeah, we're talking about the backboard and like going up for a rebound. You call that a board a lot of times. You don't necessarily have to know that. Okay. We talk about their fingertips are trembling, like they're little prayers, so they're praying almost, like, oh my God, please don't let me fall apart while it's a real struggle. Stanza 3, what's going on? We have a bit of a pattern, if you haven't picked up on it yet. More struggle. Look at that. Very good. They are having a hard time, and the speaker here wants you to know that for some reason. They're having a very hard time in these first 3 stanzas. Okay. Fourth stanza. That feels different. What's going on here? Talking about some different things now.
I guess the wives are like cheering them on.
Well, we get to wives, which is interesting. They kind of make an appearance. Are we talking about them cheering them on, though? What are they doing in that stanza?
Are they talking about their physical inability?
Yes, and I'll go ahead and put that up. But before we get to that, because it is maybe a question that we have, what's going on in this stanza? What's going on there? Talking about their wives, talking about wrists and dancing, walking home. What's the VFW? Oh, I didn't see your hand. I'm sorry.
I don't know.
What else did you have?
I was just going to say,
Oh.
well, I was just going to say that it's like the writer, he's wondering, so it's like kind of reminding me of like high school.
Yeah. Well, you have this question of the difference between being young and old, youth versus age, right? Do they still do these things, he says, which implies they once did, right? They once kissed wrists and danced, walked home. VFW, the Veterans of Foreign Wars. It's people that fought largely in the world wars. So these are some older gentlemen. Okay? Yes?
In the instance of one, he said that just come up again.
Yeah, very good. So again, we have that still, that again, sort of maybe reclaiming in some way what they used to have. Certainly. Okay. Stanza, what are we up to? 4, 5. Stanza 5. What's going on here? We start with a drunken moon, which is kind of the end of the last stanza. It seems like we left to go someplace and then we came back somewhere else. Where are we in the 5th stanza?
In the stands.
Yeah, so we're back in the game, right? And we're in the crowd. So it seems like specifically the speaker is watching this game from the stands. What does he notice in this stanza? He gives us something pretty specific.
When the men in the army fatigue said pick and roll.
All right, so a guy in army fatigues calls a play, which is a pick and roll. That's a particular thing you can do in basketball. There you go. Okay. Next stanza. What's going on there? I don't know that we're at the game anymore. No game I've ever been to anyway. What's your sense of that penultimate stanza? What's going on? We got love songs. What's going on?
Second memory, I think.
Possibly. But of what? What is it? Whether or not it's a memory, what is that? Where are they?
I think Island.
A drive-in? Very good. Outdoor movie. Not a thing I imagine most of us have ever been to. So these folks are at a drive-in, so it's back in the day. Either it's a memory or it's a fantasy, but it's somehow like this is what they used to do again, right? But this is very specific. The person the speaker is thinking about is at a drive-in movie. Who are they there with?
A girl.
A girl. So this is
Date.
it's a date, right? And again, we've seen movies, right? You've seen this sort of thing. Okay, so like, oh, do they still go on dates and they still do, they get milkshakes afterward and dance with skirts that are way too big, right? We've all seen the same stupid movies. All right, last stanza. And then we're done with step 2. What's going on in this stanza? We've left date night, it seems like. Where are we now?
At the game.
What is your chest, please?
Back at the game.
Back at the game. Good. Yeah. So part of the point I want to make, if we go through the cover the summary again real quick. First several stanzas, we get specific moments from the game, very quick moments, but they're struggling throughout. They're having a really hard time. There's questions of their sort of physical ability, like we said. And then at some point, we start in those stanzas in the second half, kind of going back and forth to better underline this question of like maybe what they once did versus what they do now, right? We go to like a date night thing, then we go back to the game, and we kind of move back and forth a little bit there in the second part. All right. Those are the first 2 steps. The last step is analysis. And that's kind of a big sort of general thing. Mostly what we got to do now, and we have a few already, which is good. We got to think about ideas, questions that come up, things you notice. If you did watch the video for last time, I like to use a phrase, alarm bells. Is there anything in the poem that kind of struck you as odd? You may not have a reading of it right now, but just something that you were like, wow, that's weird. I don't know what that's about. I should write that down in my notes, right? Like that, I may figure that out later, type of thing. Do you guys So to recap all of that, I talk a lot. Is there anything else you guys see in the poem we need to get up here with these ideas, stuff that's going on? Or do you notice anything in the work that just seems strange, seems out of place? I'll help you with one. I'll give you an example. So let's go to, which stanza is it? Fifth stanza. We talked about this briefly. You have this old man, most likely. He's wearing army fatigues, right? Now that's not too weird. We mentioned this is the VFW, so these are all probably vets, right? Okay. But here's a weird thing that I want to illustrate for you. A pretty common... It's just terribly distracting. A pretty common sort of structure we're going to deal with. Enjambment. And just a quick note that applies to really everyone. No matter the kind of student you are, you want to pretend to be a better student than you are. You want to trick me. Not everybody's a trickster. All right. Enjambment, we talked about this last time. That is where the sense of a line continues onto a new line. So here, in this stanza, is a really great example of it. Stands full, clock moving, the one in army fatigues. We break on army fatigues. What that allows you to do is read that line on its own, if only for a second, before you get to the next one, okay? Now, that doesn't always matter. It usually depends on what comes in the next line, whether it matters or not. But here, we flip things. And this is what I mean. So let's start with army fatigues. We break on that. If you saw a dude, he came in the door, say he was in the class. This will happen sometimes. He walks in to sit down. He's in army fatigues. You would form an assumption about that guy, right? Not completely, but you would have certain ideas about him, right? Like what are certain things we assume about someone dressed like that?
If they're at the military.
Sure, they're in the military. Can we get more specific? Like what do we assume about those people? Yes.
Have you ever been to war?
Possibly. Yeah. They may have actually been in a live combat scenario. Yeah. What else? What kind of person are they? I mean, maybe. Maybe. Here in 2020, we go with ideas. But again, more general, what kind of person are they?
They're a respected person.
They're respected, or
Yeah,
what do you?
respected, because they were in the.
Oh, so we show them respect.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's a big thing. What else? Because this is all stuff we kind of think on our own about them. I'm saying what kind of person do we assume they are? We assume more about them. If a dude walks in an army fatigue, you assume you know that guy a little bit. What kind of person is he? Okay. Are they messy? No. Why? You assume they're disciplined. This is what I mean. We have some assumptions here. So we assume that they're disciplined. If for no other reason, they've been trained to do that, right? They kind of have that mindset. What else do we assume about them?
They're selfless.
Selfless, and that ties a little bit into your earlier thing about respect, right? We have a verb, we say they served, which I think is very accurate. So they're disciplined, they kind of give up a big chunk of their life to protect people, help people, what have you, right? Okay, good. Anything else? Would we assume, to return to this small but growing list, would we assume maybe they're more physically capable than most? Or a lot of people?
Yeah.
Yeah. They're in the fucking army. Again, I've never been in it. I'm willing to bet most of us have not either, but we have assumptions. One of those assumptions is, well, you gotta be able to like jump and shit, right? Part of the deal. Now I know that seems like a given, but the reason it seems like a given is because all of us assume those things. We all do. The interesting thing about assumptions, about stereotypes, is that sometimes they can be true for some folks, but they're not true for everybody, right? We know this. Well, here's what's interesting. This line break, this moment of enjambment, offers you that this guy is in army fatigues. So on the one hand, when you see him in your mind, when you read the poem, you think to yourself, a lot of those things we just mentioned about that hypothetical guy walking in, right? He's disciplined and what have you. Okay. Next line, though, might change that. The one in army fatigues and house shoes. What are house shoes?
Slippers.
Slippers. What are some assumptions we have about slippers?
It's a bad idea to play basketball in them.
It absolutely is. You're trying to get killed, man? Because they're all slick. And we have stairs in my house, and one of my sons will try to come down in slippers, and like, you're going to die. So that's true. Although that actually tells us a little bit about also kind of how they're moving around in the game, probably, right? How do you picture this guy in particular walking around the court?
Shuffle.
Yeah, literally. So that undercuts this. But apart from that, apart from very specifically slippers on a basketball court, which is a mistake, again, to return to our earlier example, if a dude just walked in slippers, what assumptions do you have about somebody in slippers?
They're comfy.
They're cozy, right? Do you guys always picture them with bunnies on the front? I do. I don't know why that is. I probably saw it somewhere once. But they're very comfortable. They're very plush, right? Now, apart, again, from the very astute observation that you should not be on a basketball court in slippers, what do we do if that dude in army fatigues, that same guy that we talked about for a minute, walks in, he's wearing army fatigues, but then we look down, because that's also kind of how you size up people, right? And most of us, we don't look at the shoes first. And then he walks around, and you're like, oh wait, he's in slippers. Does that alter your opinion of that guy at all? How so?
It looks less serious.
Less serious? Maybe less disciplined, right? There's certainly an element of discipline involved in the uniform, but then house shoes cannot be regulation, right? Okay. What about the fact that they're comfortable, that they're associated with sort of being inside and like maybe even kicking your feet up, right? Like what do the house shoes do? How do they not go with army fatigues, I guess?
That makes the uniform disrespectful.
And the whole,
That just disrespect the whole core values of the military.
All I'm trying to get at, and I agree with you, is I think we all have some assumptions about what those core values are. And there's a very select few of them, I think, that those house shoes undercut very strongly. What are they? House shoes are for this group of people, whereas army fatigues are for some other group of people, right? That's basically what we're saying. Who are the house shoes for?
Civilians.
Civilians. Can we get more specific?
Kids.
Kids.
People in houses. The elderly.
Okay. So you're kind of cutting out.
People in pajamas.
What'd you say?
People in pajamas.
Yeah. Well, you're cutting this section, weird sometimes, but very true. This section of the population that can't serve, right? Kids, the elderly, folks in pajamas. People that can't serve in the military for all kinds of different reasons can wear house shoes. What's up?
are you trying to say like it's somewhere between like the army and army to like he's in bed?
I only followed like half of what you said.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You can say with your chest, man.
I just talked really low. I'm saying that, are you trying to say
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I get what we're trying to get at is what is that? Because we know he's a veteran. We know he's like no longer active duty, but it's what that represents, right? And yes,
Are you trying to get at like the whole limbo thing? Because like it's, you were this and you also were this, but now you're neither.
maybe. Although I kind of feel like in this case, it's actually this guy has all house shoes, and he's just wearing the fatigues. Is like I was once this, right? We said that way earlier, right? It's all a lot of this poem is so much of reclaiming, if only for a moment, what they used to be. But when you say that, you're kind of admitting that you used to be that. You're not really that anymore. So to me, this like 80-year-old whatever guy shuffling in house shoes, I mean, he's not that uniform anymore to some degree. So it's whatever that uniform is here. And we haven't quite answered it, so I'm going to like leave a space. Well, I'll sum it up this way. It's the difference between fatigues and house shoes. Whatever that is, for this speaker, for this world in the poem, that seems to be important. Because we don't get actually a lot of specifics from the game. Especially those first couple stanzas, they're like pretty vague, honestly. But that is the most specific thing we get about that basketball game is that guy. So one thing that tells you is that the speaker notices it and wants you to notice. It matters to the speaker, this difference. Okay. One other thing I think that matters even more than that difference. I keep talking about alarm bells. When you read this poem, and we've said a couple times, it's about old men playing basketball. Okay. And we also pointed out, it's from the perspective of a speaker in the stands. So if you can put yourself either with the speaker or right next to him, and he's telling you, he's like, oh, look at this guy, he's having a hard time, that guy's in house shoes. Okay. Is there anything, when you go back and look at it, that stands out as strange, out of place? If you were at a game watching old men play basketball, perhaps I would put money on, would not have this thought, this line of thought about these guys.
What all the thoughts about what do they still do? Do they do this, do that?
Well, and it starts in a very particular way, though. Take a minute. Talking about them playing basketball, they're having a hard time. And then at some point, the speaker's like, yeah, but what about this?
I mean, it's a good, like, that is a very weird thing to just be like talking about basketball, and then all of a sudden, do they still have sex?
Isn't it, though? In the third stanza, okay? We talked about first two stanzas, a lot of struggle, physically having a hard time. Again, I wake up in the morning and my back hurts. I'm not nearly as old as these guys. You guys have something to look forward to. Getting old sucks. But these guys are way older than me, so like they're having a real. I could not even imagine playing basketball. That's a death sentence. And then, right at the end of stanza 3, in their toiling and grand sweeps, I wonder, do they still make love to their wives, kissing the undersides of their wrists? You know, like if you were at a game watching old men play basketball, and you're like, do they still get down? I wonder. No. It is unlikely that you would entertain that thought. Probably. That's an alarm bell. You do not have to have an answer for it, at least not immediately. But that goes in your notes. Something like that, you're like, that is really weird. I may never answer it, but I need to write it down. Because that's strange. And that tells us something about the speaker. That tells us what matters to the speaker. And all I want to know in my notes Why does the speaker care? Why does he care? Understand this, and then we're going to go into the poem more. When you have a question like this, when you start to try to answer it, that's the beginning of an argument. Because whatever your answer for this, you'd have to try to prove it, right? And when you go to parts of the poem, you start working with those parts, that's analysis. That's you building an argument. Okay? All right. So one point I want to make before I send you off looking through this poem for a minute. We keep talking about enjambment. A lot of what I'm doing today is highlighting for you how poems work, and enjambment in a lot of poems, not every poem, but a lot of poems. Enjambment is a pretty important mechanism, right? Notice this line here at the end of stanza 3. Mask is killing me. I wonder, do they still make love to their wives? So it breaks like this. It looks about like that on the page, right? So we've said, already, that's weird. And we get that. But I would say, because we're talking about details now, we can get even more specific. Given the line break, you could argue, what really matters to the speaker? What is he really worried about when he's watching these guys struggle playing basketball? Given this.
How their ages affected them?
Well, yeah. Remember what I said earlier. With enjambment, especially, with line breaks, if only for a millisecond, you're going to read that line before you ever get to this one. Plus, between these two, there's actually a stanza break, so it takes even longer. So when you read the poem the way it's on the page, right, you could argue that the speaker is much more concerned with what idea. He wonders, somebody put it in a sentence for me, he wonders whether or not these old men can do what? Period. With their wives, right? That comes in the next line. Oh, sure, with their wives. You could argue, saying a body paragraph, this is what he's worried about. Can they do it at all? And yes, physicality, physical ability is a part of that equation. Can they do it at all? Well, now we've gotten a little more specific with this. It's not why does he care, according to our line of questioning. Why does he care that they can make love to their wives? No. Why does he care that they can make love at all? That's a different question. All right. At this stage, you can do two things. And I would recommend both. But we're not going to have time to do it like a super developing class. But the two things you can do. Number one, you can just try to answer that question. See what you come up with. No matter what, though, you're going to have to do the second one, which is what we're going to do now. You go back through the poem now with this crazy question in mind, and kind of what we've talked about in mind. Go back through the poem for a minute. See if we can add to our inventory. Do we have any other moments where the speaker seems to maybe be thinking about this? Maybe we missed it before. Just take a minute. Look for just like language. Look for spots where the speaker's telling on himself. What are we talking about here? The speaker wants to know what? If the old man can still get down. Right? Okay. I saw your hand.
Yeah. It says, the front of the bone subject, the caught bread, the side, the front of the body mirror gives birth to itself.
There's a lot of heavy breathing and grinding.
They're tired easily.
It sounds a little suggestive, right? Because we are talking about basketball. But now, with this question in mind, it does seem to matter to the speaker. Now we go back and look at earlier moments. We're like, well, is he just talking about basketball when he talks about basketball? I don't know. It's kind of, yeah. Do we see other moments like that? And again, the short answer is yes.
You could say their gestures and love again with the pure geometry of curves.
The pure geometry of curves. Again, on the one hand, it's actually just a really beautiful way to talk about basketball. The ball, some elements of the court are curved. You got the shot is a curve. Like there's a lot of geometry. That's a really nice way to talk about basketball. But also, with what the speaker seems to be worried about, it's starting to feel like the speaker is telling on himself unintentionally, right? He's thinking about this more than we first realized. There's a lot of this in the poem. We're going to do a couple more. I just want you to see this. Second stanza. We talked about the backboard, right? They're getting maybe a rebound, right? On the boards, their hands and fingertips tremble. What is that? What other kind of board is that? Look at you. This is a dirty poem. I'm going to do a couple more. By the way, I had to say this in my last class. Not every class will be this, all right? There are other poems about other things. This one just so happens to be about this. Okay. I just don't want you going out here and be like, man, I don't know if I can do this all semester. It was just old people sex. Huh? All right. Where was I? Oh, all right. You pointed out kind of the end of second stanza into the third one, the grinding, the heavy breathing. Okay. Then we get that question we talked about. So the fourth stanza. Do they still make love to their wives? Wives are kind of an afterthought. That's nice. Kissing the undersides of their wrists. Somebody talk to me about enjambment real quick there. That line break. What does that do? Because kissing the undersides of your date's wrist or your wife's wrist, that sounds nice. Very intimate gesture. What does it do when we break, though, on that one word?
Kissing the undersides.
Does that maybe change? Okay, we don't have to go too hard, but changes things now, right? It's throughout this poem. It's not everywhere, but it's pretty close. So now, we still haven't maybe answered this question, but we have made it more specific again. It's not just, why does the speaker care about this? Why does the speaker care about this so much that it's on his mind constantly? Constantly. It's throughout the poem. It's in pretty much every stanza. For instance, in the 6th stanza, so the penultimate stanza, we talked about how this is either a memory or a fantasy in the way that, like if somebody asked you, do you think your grandfather went on dates? And you're like, yeah, probably. How did that work? I don't know. You went to a drive-in? Isn't that what people did back then? I don't know. That's kind of what's going on here. We got love songs on, okay? They're watching the movie, the outdoor movie. Do you see any other suggestive language in this stanza? There's at least 2 moments that I think are pretty important. Yes, ma'am? You were just trying it out. This is practice. Well, that's literally what she's doing. It is suggestive of a certain activity. I would give you that. What about the next line, though? I would argue that does even more. As her raven hair flames in the shuddering light of the outdoor movie. Now, when you read it straight through, without worrying about the enjambment, again, we've been to the movies, I imagine. Even when it's inside, if you ever look at the audience, that light that's on everybody, you don't even realize because you're just watching the movie. That's what that is. We know what that looks like, okay? But we break on shuddering. As her raven hair flames in the shuddering. Again, we have this idea of movement, like rapid movement, okay? So that's a little bit suggestive, given everything we've said to this point. But the next line is even better. Her hair flames in the shuddering light of the outdoor movie, and now he drives, gliding toward the net. Okay. What's up?
I
Yeah. Yes. That's literally what happened, right? And again, that still goes to our question. It's like, he's thinking about this a lot. But here in particular, not every line is just suggestive, is the point I'm getting at. This line, importantly, moves from the fantasy back to the reality, right? Because we go from light of the outdoor movie, and now he drives gliding toward the net. So in that moment, we move between the two, okay? But again, it's enjambed, which offers us an opportunity. So literally, what's happening when that guy drives toward the net? What's that? What happens when you drive toward the net?
Shoot the ball in the net.
You're going to score.
Yeah.
What else is going on? Nobody wants to say it, but we're all on the same page. Yes. Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure. Okay.
I'm making sure we're still.
Yeah. I know nobody wants to say it, but I have to make sure somehow that we're all on the same page. Okay. Now here's what's interesting about that, because again, this whole class isn't just old people sex. In this moment, by moving from the fantasy to the reality, as you pointed out, we're kind of comparing the two, as we've done. And now he drives. It's both driving the lane, but also sex act. Couple questions. Number one, this old man, he's driving down the lane in the game. What's he going to do when he gets to the net? Is he going to do like a windmill dunk, like behind the back? Like, what's he going to do to score, do you imagine? Does anybody know anything about basketball? He's going to do what? Yeah. Maybe like a layup? What kind of shot is a layup? Yeah. It's something you learn like the first, second day. You learn basketball in some respect. It's an easy shot. Now, we're comparing this sex act to one of, if not the easiest shot in basketball. Might that mean anything? What are we saying about back in the day when these guys were younger? We're comparing it to a layup. Like, it's a big deal when somebody misses a layup. We laugh at those people. That's how easy a layup is. And now we're saying, with this transition, oh, back in the day when they were young in this fantasy, it was so easy. It was like a layup. What was like a layup, though?
Just that the girl, he and her, she was easy.
We're saying both of those things. And that's what's important. It's not just sex was easier in the way that we've thought about up till now, like physically, right? Because we talk about that a lot in the poem. But also in this stanza, it's the girl. Just, there's a girl there. That's part of the equation. So we'd have to argue that the speaker is sort of fantasizing that the girls were easier than two. That's part of the deal. So again, we get more specific with what the speaker is thinking about. He has a very particular, I think we're starting to see, idea of not just what sex is or maybe what sex was for these guys when they were younger, but what it's supposed to be and how it works, right? And it seems easy for these guys, according to the speaker. All right, so we have a lot added to our inventory now, I think. So we can at least attempt to try to answer some of this. We talked about youth versus age. Physicality versus sort of what, like inability or something on this side. We never answered fatigues versus house shoes. But it seems like, I mean, look, these two are very easily connected. We understand that, right? You're younger, stuff's easier to do physically. We get that. Okay. Can we try to better define those? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm kind of thinking maybe when they were back in school,
Yeah.
the author, he was like on the outside looking in.
What do you mean by that?
Like he was on the outcast side and he was looking.
Oh, well, again, you'd have to be able to point to something from the poem to give you that. Because, like, to me, first, all right, I'll put it to you this way. How old do you think the speaker is? Huh? Is he old or is he older? Here's what I mean by that. It's called old men playing basketball. So again, that's the speaker telling us this is old men. That tells you about the speaker. That tells you the speaker's age, I think. He's younger. Old men don't talk like that old ass man. No, because that's me too. They don't do that. Yeah. So the speaker is younger. So the only reason I say that is I don't think he was like a peer with these old men. And he is a spectator now because he's like watching them. But what I'm saying is there's something about he cares desperately about the sex lives of these old men. I don't get to say that very often. Yeah, it's weird. I just weirded myself out. But he cares about that so much that it's throughout the poem. And we learn, again, at various points, like how he defines that. And we see moments. But why? Why does the speaker care about these old men and whether or not they do these things? Yeah.
Is he trying to see like how he's gonna be?
Possibly.
Trying to see like what to do, what not to do.
Well, let's push on that some. Why? Because we all get older. It does happen. What do you think, given what we said about this guy and what he has said about these old men, what do you think his opinion of that is? What does he think it's like to be an old man? Is it great? Is it?
It's a struggle.
It's a struggle. Specifically, to do what?
Play basketball and make money.
To have sex. I mean, he's worried about basketball, but not really. Not really. Okay. So our speaker is very concerned with... I'm losing things. Oh. I think we can take like kind of how we're talking about this for basketball and actually say, well, we're actually talking about sexual ability, ultimately. Okay? That's what our speaker is worried about. Okay. But again, why? Why is our speaker worried about that? Why does he care? We say, well, he's worried about himself and his sexual ability when he gets older. Okay? Why? Again, why does he care? It seems to matter so much to this guy, this speaker, that it's throughout the poem. So that tells you he's worried. Is that fair? Why? Is there anything from the poem? Is there anything we've talked about that can give you a little bit just of a hypothesis, right? Yeah.
Not sure if they can boys rise up in
What is that? How about that?
boys rise up in old men.
Okay. Do you have an idea about that?
Guess,
I mean, I'll help you a little bit. On the one hand, I mean, there at the end, that boys rise up in old men, that's this idea that through playing this game, through doing these activities that they're doing, even if they're difficult, they can maybe reclaim some bit of their youth, right? If only for a moment. But again, for the speaker, what is that youth ultimately? Why does that youth matter? We keep coming back to, I mean, when he says boy, he means like 17 or whatever, right? He means sex. So, why? Can we try to answer it with fatigues and house shoes? Because if you follow the setup we have throughout the poem, we phrase it in different ways. It seems like it all comes back to fatigues can get down. House shoes, not so much, according to the speaker. Why? What is it about fatigues versus house shoes that leads him to that conclusion, do you think?
Maybe he thinks like fatigues are like physically capable.
Yeah.
And then house shoes,
But why?
because they're older.
Young people wear house shoes. We talked about that.
Yeah.
So the one big thing we got to cross here in the next 10 minutes, I think we can do it. Army fatigues, being in the Army, being a veteran, any of that stuff, symbolizes something. Okay? House shoes to the speaker symbolizes something else. And it really does seem like you can put a line. Everything on this side goes together, everything on this side goes together. And once you cross that line for the speaker, it's very difficult to get back. And he's worried that one day he's going to cross that line into house shoes. What does it mean to be in the Army? For the speaker. Not necessarily for you, right? Although I don't know that it's super dissimilar. We're thinking like the speaker now, as best we can. These guys, these Army vets, well, I'm the speaker, and what we know about me, what's my number one concern? What's my number one concern? I'm the speaker. Good. Sexual ability, right? To be super specific. Man, those Army vets, I bet they can get down. All the time, if they want to. Yeah. Awesome. I'm the speaker. Who are these guys to the speaker? How does he see them? When you're young, when you're physically capable of certain things, maybe you're in the Army. What other associations do we have about people in the Army? Assumptions we have.
Like they're heroic.
Sure. Huh? They protect? What'd she say?
They like, yeah, keep us protected.
Okay, good. Sure.
Strength and stature.
Strength and stature? Oh, yeah. So, okay, and that ties a little bit into this, right? It'd be weird to see a guy in Army fatigues who was like smaller, you know? We just envision, like, if not Rambo, then at least Rambo's brother, right? Like somebody that... What is that? What is that kind of guy? How would you describe it? They're very what? You say attractive? Maybe. I mean, people have different types. I don't know. I think the speaker in some way finds that idea very attractive. Not in the way you meant, but yeah. Why? Why is the speaker... I'll put it to you this way. It seems like the speaker is worried that whatever aspect of Rambo he might have, he's going to lose. Right? When he gets older, less physically able, one day he'll be in house shoes. Rambo does not wear house shoes that I've seen. Why? Because what happened? You don't get girls in house shoes. Why not? You're just guessing. I mean, I've been out of the game for a while. I've been married for a while. But back in my day, house shoes didn't really cut it. Why?
They're not seen as like a sex stylish or cool.
What's not cool about house shoes?
I find them very comfortable.
That should be great. I like to be uncomfortable. If I see somebody likes to be uncomfortable, like, oh, we have that in common. Let's be comfortable together. No? Well, why not for these guys in particular? House shoes. What's wrong with house shoes? They're too what? House shoes are not like army fatigues because they are too what?
Domestic.
Domestic? Well, that's a very sort of top shelf word you got there. What do you mean by that?
I mean, because like you're saying, because you have like the fatigues, which are this uniform,
Yeah, yeah.
and then you have house shoes, which are this very like domesticated.
It's a kind of a uniform too, but of a different thing, right?
Yeah.
What's that different thing?
It's less civil, less respectful.
Weirdly, because they're cozy, but they're also most often associated with who?
Older people.
Kind of. But again, we're comparing army fatigues to house shoes. Who wears army fatigues for the speaker? Who wears house shoes for the speaker?
People who are capable, people who aren't capable.
A very diplomatic way of putting it. Yeah, sure. If you're the speaker, who's the most capable? We got no time left, but we can do this. Who?
The people who wear fatigues.
I know, but you guys keep circling that drain. Come on now. Who wears those fatigues? Who's the most capable? They're young and they're what?
Fit,
And
male, I guess.
look at you.
What'd you say? Man.
Male.
They're men. They're young men.
It's a stupid stereotype.
Sure. I'm not saying I agree with it.
Yeah.
But the speaker in this poem, again, we're seeing into the speaker's mind. We're seeing into the speaker's world. And some big part of that world is certain people wear army fatigues, certain people wear house shoes, certain kinds of people. And what's really interesting, now that we've crossed that bridge with no time left, again, the line between the two. And once you cross that line, whether you get older or some other way that we'll talk about here in the next couple weeks, of crossing that line, it seems like for the speaker, it's damn near impossible to cross it back, right? Maybe for a moment, boys sprout up in old men. But that's for a moment. That's not something you can get back. And the speaker is very, very worried about that. Now, we have to end it here, because we're out of time, and I'm sure that doesn't bother you too much. But pushing on that more. Why is the speaker so worried about crossing that line, losing whatever he feels like he's going to lose? Why does he feel that way? Why is he so worried? Trying to answer those kinds of questions, that's what actually gets you to a really good argument, to a thesis perhaps. That's how you start writing these papers. For next time, because I won't see you guys for a week. First of all, homework for this week. I'm filming today, and you can watch it if you like, but you won't have to because you were here. But I will post this. I gesture to the screen, so that'll be strange for people. Hello. But I say on the syllabus, by the end of this week, I want you to explicate the poem we're reading for next time, which you will not be here for, so that'll be fun. I want you to explicate a poem called Little Boy. I'm changing that to, I mean, you can explicate that poem, or you can explicate the poem we did today. It's up to you. Now the question you all have is, what the hell does explicate mean? That's what we did today, right? You dig into a poem, you very briefly summarize it, like 2 sentences, okay? I mean, we summarized Old Men Playing Basketball in a sentence. It's not hard. But then after that, dive deep, man. Do you have any alarm bells going off anywhere? Do you notice anything strange? Attempt an answer. You're allowed to be wrong in your explication. Much better to be wrong there than to be wrong on a paper. But see what happens, right? Diving into details, actually trying to figure this stuff out, that's what I want you to have turned in by the end of the week, okay? For either Old Men Playing Basketball or Little Boy, it's up to you. For next week, and I will remind you, but given our crazy setup, I'm going to try to do 2 weeks at a time here. For next week, we're reading, I think it's Body and Souls. It's on the syllabus. You're going to have a discussion board assignment. We're going to do some writing. All that is due next week. But I just want to put it that way because there's been some confusion about how that works. Any questions about what we did today or the homework or any of that stuff? Everybody feel good? Feel strong?
Yeah.
All right. See you in a week.